trying to solve any problem involving police brutality and unnatural loss of life, you have to understand the history of police brutality. And from the very beginning of America, the police job was to keep black people in their place. They were never there to protect black people. They were never there to assist black people. The police have always been an agent of force, an agent of the state to oppress black revolutionary thought and behavior. And so as long as you have discontented black folk, you're always going to have police violence. Now, how do you slow this down? How do you control it? How do you contain it? You can't get rid of racism, because in order to get rid of racism, you would have to get rid of white people. And so racism will always be, but we have to be able to contain and control it. And I think the best way to do that is we have to hold white people accountable by disrupting something that is so central to the function of America. And that is the economic culture of this country. Black people account for $1 trillion economy. Okay. We are almost exclusively responsible for making non-Africans in this country multi-millionaires by the way in which we consume things. If you look at hair care, if you look at certain automobiles, if you look at malt liquor, certain types of clothing, Air Jordan sneakers, I mean, there's certain items within the capitalistic market that are almost exclusively been made and branded by black folks' love for them. So I think we have to start looking at our economic behavior and how our economics, or better yet, our disorganized economics, actually helps to influence our poor political standing. There's no such thing as a strong political foundation without a strong economic foundation. For example, if we were using our collective economic wealth to control the elected officials, if we were using our collective economic wealth to control the behavior of businesses in New York City and in other places, Michael Brown might still be here. Eric Garner might still be here. Here's the question you have to ask yourself. And as a psychologist, we always deal with how behavior is controlled by the consequences. Operant condition. All human behavior is a function of what happens as a result. When Officer Darren Wilson exited his car and drew his weapon on Michael Brown, when the officer here in New York decided to choke Eric Garner and not let him go until he was dead, in those men's minds, as is in the minds of any human being, what is going to happen if I don't stop? If I kill this boy, what's going to happen? If I choke this black man to death, what's going to happen? Okay? Nothing. I'm going to get off. And so as long as the African American community doesn't offer consequences to both black folk and white folk for the mistreatment of black people, what they do can only get worse. Because in the law of psychology, all behavior gets stronger over time. So what am I saying? I'm saying there's going to be more police killings. This is just the beginning. There's going to be more killings. Why? Because when you don't offer appropriate consequence to a behavior, it gets worse. You have children. I have children. When our children do things that are not appropriate, you have to give them a consequence to weaken their resolve to do it again. But if you don't give them the consequence, what did that do? By not giving the consequence, you just strengthened the likelihood that it's going to happen again. So the black community has to look at how our disorganized economics and our weak political foundation is actually feeding the murder of black boys. It's one thing to look at the racism, but we also have to look at our complicity in it by what we do and what we don't do. As my ancestor Frederick Douglass always said, for every slave, there's a slave master. For every slave master, there's a slave. We can talk about the enslaver, but what about the slave who participates in his enslavement? The victim always has a degree of responsibility in the situation because the victim is not powerless. We just choose not to exercise our power. I felt that the officer who killed Eric Garner was likely to get acquitted because I saw that the momentum within the criminal justice system was basically putting forth an energy that basically stated that we're not going to send police to jail for killing black men, which has a precedent. In slavery, white men didn't go to jail for killing black men. In Reconstruction, white men didn't go to jail for killing black men. And it was codified. If you look at Jim Crow, you look at the black codes, it was in law that you do not go to jail for killing white people. Chief Justice Taney of the Dred Scott decision, who said what? A black man has no right that a white man is bound to respect. That Dred Scott decision, that law has never been overturned, and it applies perfectly when you want to interpret just how these police officers are constantly being not acquitted. They haven't even been indicted. You see, they're not even been indicted. Now, the Trayvon's murderer, he was indicted and acquitted. But these police officers, they're not even being found to have done anything wrong, which just makes what they did all the more grotesque in the eyes of the public, because what the grand jury said, we can't even find something. After looking at the choking video, after looking at what happened with Michael Brown, the grand jury, the public, the white public, is saying that we don't see anything that they did that can even remotely constitute a crime. And I think that in and of itself is what enrages black folks so much. In other words, had they taken them through the trial and acquitted them, for a lot of black people, they could have lived with that. I couldn't have, because I knew what they did was wrong. But a lot of black people would have said at least justice took its toll. But here you have a situation where we don't even see a need to bring charges. And I think that's what woke up even the most conservative black person. It had to make them look a little bit differently at what's happening. And I would add to that, why are we seeing so much of this now? Because we're reliving the 60s all over again. Why? There is an increased attempt to incarcerate and exterminate black males because we're no longer needed for the American social order to function. There's more black women in America than black men. If we can reduce the numbers of these black men, these sisters will not have men to build families with. They will not have men to have children with. It is a mild eugenics and birth control strategy when we look at the incarceration and extermination of black males. We're not needed. Bring 5 million, mostly illegal immigrants, to America because they need those immigrants to replace black people in the economic order. When slavery ended, one of the first decisions that was made by the United States Congress was to begin a gradual elimination of the African American population. We wasn't even African American back then, we were just Negro. How do we get rid of these people who we never wanted to be here? So here we are at a crossroads in our history. 150 years and all the racism that we thought went away came back. Why? Because they think they can get rid of us. They really see a possibility of America without the black man. And they're working towards to make that a reality because the black man is no longer needed as a laborer. They have other non-white people of color to work those jobs. You see, so if we don't have jobs for black people, what do we do with them? Incarcerate them and kill them. And that's why they're building more jails than schools. And that's why they're closing down schools by the dozens, because the purpose of schooling is to prepare you to work. That's why schools were created, for work. You see, but if you don't have work for black people, what do you need schools for? You don't. Shut those down, build jails, bring in the immigrants to take all the remaining jobs, and just let black people die a slow, quiet death of economic starvation.